Welcome to Green and Red, scrappy politics for scrappy people. A regular podcast on radical environmental and anti-capitalist politics. Brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
To the silky smooth sounds of the Green and Red podcast. I'm your co-host, Scott Parkin, in Texas today. Not Berkeley, sadly, I'm in Texas. And as always, I am joined by
Bob Bazanko in Niles, Ohio.
And so today we're going to be talking about a frequent topic on the Green and Red podcast, which is around the genocide in Palestine. On March 11th, in central Ohio, I believe in a town called Heath, Ohio, which is the location of a Boeing facility, an action actually happened that blockaded the facility for a good part of the day. Dozens of activists swarmed the entrances to it. I believe 5 were arrested in the end, which we'll kind of get into that a little bit through the interview. But joining us to talk about it are Jordan and Prince Shakur, who are the co-hosts of the Dugout podcast. Jordan is a decolonial abolitionist and Black anarchist who works with the legal defense team related to the action, which is part of a campaign called Boeing is Guilty. And then Prince Shakur, and also co-produces The Mix, which is a podcast formed by currently and formerly incarcerated abolitionists. And then Prince Shakur is a queer Jamaican-American organizer, author, and educator. Both of them are in Ohio. They're in central Ohio. So I want to welcome Jordan and Prince Shakur to the Green and Red podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us on the show.
And maybe we can actually start off. We'll start off with a little big picture. Could you actually just give us some background on Boeing's involvement in the genocide in Palestine?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start a little bit. Obviously, because we've been helping a lot with Boeing is Guilty and trying to advocate for the folks that were arrested. We've been doing a lot of research. But I would just start by saying that Boeing is a company that's worth over $111 billion. And their CEO in 2023 made $32 million last year. And that's alongside the fact that Boeing, since at least 9/11, has been one of the top 5 contractors with the Pentagon in terms of military weaponry, the operating systems that they have. But in terms of Israel, you can literally look up Boeing in Israel, and there's a document that literally is Boeing bragging about how they have been aligned with Israel since 1948. Some of the first conflicts that Israel had after they asserted statehood was that they were in conflict with Egypt, and because there was a weapons embargo at the time, Israel actually smuggled I think it was 2 B-17s out of the US to go to Israel to be able to use those planes against Egypt. And so you can look at so much research, but I mean, Boeing is very much aligned with what Israel is trying to do in terms of their JDAMs, their operating systems, offering all sorts of aircrafts, just being literally a war profiting company. And I think people in Ohio figured out that there was a facility here, and it just made sense in terms of the conflict that's going on, the ongoing genocide, everything that's happened to Palestinians since 1948. And there's plenty of Ohio politicians that are in support of Israel, especially like Governor Mike DeWine. And even in 2016, I believe Ohio was, I think it was maybe the 15th or 16th state to ban state agencies being able to boycott Israel. And so there's a lot of precedent locally, on a state level, on a repression level, and I think on a media level in terms of like how these things tend to be covered. So I think opportunities like this are important. But yeah, that's kind of my piece about it.
Yeah, my piece is that Boeing was invented to kill people, and they're pretty good at it. Since the beginning of the company, it was making munitions and, well, not munitions, but the planes and eventually the guiding systems for missiles. So all that space race stuff and getting the better technology so we can have better satellites and all this kind of stuff. And then they got into making commercial airplanes, which we know, and as of hundreds of families know, they also kill people. whether in the States, Turkey, Senegal, all over the world. And Boeing has had these colonial and imperial relationships since they've been doing international work, which has been their linchpin. Their whole thing was to make these weapons and make things more efficient for killing. They have offices in South Africa, moving them up to Ethiopia, and kind of always been in that resource war kind of gang, war profiteers.
Should we talk about like the specific facility? Like,
Well, that's what I was
Yeah.
just going to ask you. Yeah, the facility in Ohio, does it have a specific product it's making or? Yeah.
Yeah, they work on what guides missiles to make them more precise. Same kind of machinery that you use to kind of fly a plane, but they have that offshoot there, and they have, I believe they've just re-upped their 16-year contract to continue making that kind of material there. I think there's other stuff.
yeah, and this particular facility in Heath, Ohio, we understand that they make a lot of like the systems that are in the aircrafts that help guide the missiles or the bombs that are being dropped. A big American-made kind of part of that, I guess, process that Boeing has invented is the JDAM, the Joint Direct Attack Munitions, which basically turns like free fall bombs into bombs that have these sort of guidance kits or systems on them. And so it's basically like a cost-effective way of the military being able to commit more genocide. And so this facility is a big part of a lot of the things that go into the airplanes that help these bombs get dropped, help these planes get into the places that they need to in terms of Israel's mission. And so that was like a big understanding of, I think, of a lot of the people that were behind the March action.
And assuming that Boeing is a pretty big employer in the area, is how has the community response been to the action? I also know that Central Ohio, you're near Columbus, which is, my understanding, like a little bit of a liberal all three of you are in Ohio, so I'm just making assumptions here, but
Yeah.
Columbus is a little bit of a liberal bastion because that's where the Ohio State is. But how has the community response been?
I mean, we could see from media and also from people on the ground, there was, I think it's one of the largest employers in Heath, the town. And there were, you can see from like media clips, both from like citizen journalists and from local NBC's affiliates and stuff like that, that there were people lined up and down the roads trying to get in while the blockade was happening. Some of them cheering, some of them cursing, some of them asking questions, some of them just trying to get to work and then like calling their bosses and general confusion. And I think it's a broad array because it is Ohio. And I think there's been support locally when it comes to fundraising. There's been lots of people that have been down to put time, energy, and labor into making sure that the folks that take this kind of risk and action are getting supported throughout the way and highlighting cases and contradictions. Yeah. What does you say about the local support?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say, like, I'd reiterate some of what Jordan mentioned, that from a lot of the folks that were there, especially journalists, they mentioned that, like, especially the younger Boeing workers that were stopped on the road would stop people and be like, what's going on? What's happening? And then they'd have the situation explained to them, and they'd be like, I don't have to work today. And obviously there were some workers that were angry. And I think obviously since Heath is like near like the capital, I mean, there's the politics of like a smaller town, certain industries are really prevalent. Boeing is obviously a very big company. And so I think with the workers, there seemed to be like a dichotomy, but as far as like some of the journalists that were there was definitely some younger worker support, which I thought was cool.
Did you put the group together for that action specifically, or has there already been actions going on in the area about Palestine?
I'd say especially in the past year, there's been a bit more, or especially since October 7th, there's been a bit more of an emphasis on decentralized actions and using information that's been put out by sources that folks have built affinity and trust with, and kind of finding ways to move around that. So yeah, there's been actions in Central Ohio, Northeast Ohio, all around Ohio in support of Palestine. And I think it's great to see coalitions build and disperse and build and disperse.
Yeah, and because in Columbus they've actually had some pretty big encampments at the university when we saw the wave of student occupations and student encampments, right? Correct.
Yeah, I think there was a couple day-long encampments.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and the encampments got, like, at least locally in Columbus, had faced a lot of repression. Numerous people were arrested. I think at least from the first night there was lots of video footage of people being brutalized, and even from some of the organizers from the U.S. encampment stuff. The local police were trying to tie together the university protests with even the Boeing action, like, falsely. And so even on, like, a statewide level, we can see how the police are talking across county lines, trying to intimidate people, trying to intimidate students that are just, like, literally gathering on campus peacefully with art, usually in prayer. Because even with day one and day two of the encampments, you could see, like, the tone shift, because the first day a lot of people faced repression, and I think after that a lot of the organizers were a lot more careful, or just, like, fearful of CPD, especially Columbus Division of Police, coming in and attacking people, because you could see, like, things that were happening at UCLA or other campuses. So yeah, there was definitely a movement here, but I think police did their best to stamp it down. And I think it I think being in Central Ohio was messed up, just to see the police be that extreme once again, and to, like, prove themselves once again. And so I think this whole Boeing is guilty thing, in a lot of ways, for me, is about, I don't know, I think of it as, like, I grew up in Ohio, I'm from here, I care about where our tax dollars are going and what our police officers and police departments are doing. And I think it just tells you a lot that in pretty much any situation related to Palestine, the police are going to either sit by and watch people get brutalized, or take a part of the brutality themselves. So yeah.
On the day of your action, as you blockaded the facility, what was the response? I mean, police came out. How, was it like an overwhelming thing? Did they grab people? How did they react to it?
On the day of the action, journalists reported that there was lots of like, confusion, especially with tactics used. The cops almost ran through and did a lot of dangerous things with technical aspects that they were unaware of. So there was a lot of there was some local support with, like, rallies that were outside some of the action points, and there were people making sure that the cops weren't running into pipes that were blocking stuff, or anything that was going on. There was a very aggressive response based out of the confusion. I believe Heath and Licking have about a dozen, maybe 2 dozen cops. And the 3 that were on shift that day were there, so they were pulling in lots of other state agencies, especially for different experience. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Bob.
No, I think I was going to ask the same thing you did. They made arrests and took people in and so on, or?
Well, one other before that question is,
Yeah.
like, I've seen from social media, from Instagram, for example, that it looked like bridges were blocked, which is bridges go into the facility. How many entrances were actually blockaded?
There were 3 road entrances.
Right. Okay. And in the end, 5 people got arrested.
Yes.
Yeah, and just to add on that, 5 people were arrested, and now they're currently facing charges that range from blocking an emergency vehicle, failure to comply with police order, disorderly conduct, inducing panic, destruction of official police businesses. And it's been posted about a little bit, but it's also, like, out there that some folks from Boeing were allegedly trying to pressure the prosecutors to get some of the people who were arrested to take down, like, social media posts related to calling out Boeing or being pro-Palestine. And so even with some of the stuff that's like at least like the legal team has put out there, it's kind of clear that Boeing is trying to do what they do, which is hide the truth, hide the truth.
So what's the status of your campaign now? Are the actions continuing? People are still getting involved?
Yeah, right now, with the campaign, a lot of basically we're fundraising, so we're raising money that can help the 5 defendants and their legal needs, other needs that they might have. So we've been pushing out the GoFundMe link. Right now, our goal for July is to raise at least another 10,000, just because these defendants need lawyers. Being able to go up against a company like Boeing takes a lot of work, a lot of resources, and so we've been pushing that, and then also just spreading the word with other local organizations, other local groups, and yeah, and figuring out where we can kind of do as many calls to action. And there's a lot of stuff that the legal defense team is kind of planning moving forward, like some other potential things to kind of put pressure out there, like phone zaps or other things like that.
Yeah, and one thing about the campaign um, that the legal team is exploring is like a lot of support is needed from the local community and other people in the region. They're like court support, people being there, press press conferences, really letting a show of force or like a show of numbers that Boeing and Heath know that prosecution knows that there might be consequences, social pressure, or anything for trying to actually enact such a retaliation on activists. Especially because Boeing has been in the news a lot lately, so it makes sense why they wouldn't want a little something else to come out, especially not in their heartland of Silicon Valley or wherever we are now.
Yeah, and I think a big priority is just letting more people know that there's a Boeing facility in Ohio. Like I'm sure, like in Heath or around, and maybe like a good number of people in Columbus. But I think just the implication of this facility being in Ohio and being this big source of income for people in a certain region and a source of profit for the state, and even like certain Ohio politicians like signing. I think there was a politician that I was reading about that signed like $100 million in bonds to some like Israeli or
too.
yeah. Oh, the Ohio Treasury. And so I think a big part of this campaign is just like really finding out how to educate people about what is happening economically in our state and how it's tied to all of these larger issues. Because I think a big thing that we've been kind of, I don't know, like trying to put out there is like, why should Ohioans care? And we should care because our tax dollars are going towards this. And so I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do too.
Yeah. If people are interested in more information or they want to give you support, like the GoFundMe page, how do they find that?
Yeah, I've found it pretty Googleable, putting GoFundMe Boeing. Or you can go on GoFundMe and go to the support legal battle against Boeing. And we also have the Instagram that we're running to make sure that there's more awareness around what's going on. And that's the Boeing is guilty page, which will be flooded with much more updates.
And we'll put some of those links in the show notes too. My only other question is there is just around the court stuff. Is there, do y'all have any idea of how much longer it'll go on? Like, is there like any upcoming court dates that people should be aware of in this moment?
Yeah, we're organizing support for that right now. So I think keeping that updated on the Boeing is guilty page, because we have stuff coming up in July. We have stuff coming up in September, and then trying to do more community events in August and get more fundraising, get more support. Because if we're doing all this court support, we want to make sure people are fed, they have water, we can have gas, to get folks from Ohio to really put some pressure on there. Setting time so that we can like host calls like this and do phone zaps together and have a little conversation about where we are as a space, places to unify around.
Excellent. Well, definitely keep us updated. We'd love to we'll be happy to continue to follow the story and give updates on it. Folks, you've been listening to Prince Shakur and Jordan with Boeing is Guilty and co-hosts of the Dugout podcast, Black Anarchist podcast. If you like what you hear, and check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening to us on any of the many audio platforms we're on, give us a rate and a review. And then if you really like us, check us out at Facebook, or excuse me, at greenandredpodcast.com, and hit the support button, or become a patron at patreon.com/greenredpodcast. Prince Shakur and Jordan, really appreciate actually all of your work in challenging Boeing in Silicon Valley. I'd never heard that before, Silicon Valley. And also, just and thanks for all of your work just in general. Appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yep. Everybody else out there, make trouble and misbehave, and we'll talk again soon.